Learning is defined as obtaining new knowledge and skills based on experiences. It's like adding something new to your brain for storage. Memory is defined as retrieving knowledge and skills from your brain. Every person learns and remembers things differently. We saw this when we conducted the memory tests and the contaminated waste spill activity. One thing that can help us remember is an association, relating new information to something that you already know. Another thing that can help us remember is a mnemonic device. A mnemonic device is like a trick to help your brain retrieve information. A mnemonic device can be a sentence or a song that incorporates the information you're trying to remember. An example of a mnemonic device is "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." This is something frequently used in math classes to remember the order of operations: parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, and subtract. Take a moment and try to create your own mnemonic device for the first 10 elements on the periodic table. Those elements are hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and neon. I have also included the symbols for these elements in case you would rather use the symbols instead of the names. One possible mnemonic device is this sentence: Happy Henry likes baking bundt cakes near open flames. Not. Humans have 5 senses that they use to obtain information about their environment. We use the sense of sight or vision, our sense of hearing, taste, touch, and finally, smell. Which of these senses do you think is the most important? Some of you would probably say that your sight is the most important. Others of you might say that it's hearing. Well, think about for a moment what you would do if you didn't have either of these 2 senses. What would your life be like if you were missing both your sense of sight and your sense of hearing? Helen Keller had to face many challenges to learn. She lost both her sense of sight and her sense of hearing at a very young age. She struggled to communicate with her family and was out of control by the age of 6. Anne Sullivan, a teacher who had experience with blindness, worked with Helen for years. Anne had created an alphabet out of hand motions. At first, Anne used this alphabet to teach Helen the names for things, such as water. This process was still very difficult for Helen because she could not, at first, connect the names of things to an actual object. She did not have anything to associate the word with. Repetition paid off, and Helen Keller went on to write a book about her experiences with Anne Sullivan. Our eyes are one of our most important sense organs. They are very complex structures. Light hits the cornea, the curved outer surface of the eye. The cornea focuses images that we see. Next, the light from the cornea travels through the aqueous humor, and then it actually enters the eye through the pupil, an adjustable opening in the iris. The image is focused further by the lens, which is just behind the iris, and it is by the vitreous humor, the jelly-like sphere that fills most of the eye itself. Finally, the image projects onto the retina at the back of the eye. The retina is a tissue covering the back half of the inside of the eye. In the retina, photoreceptors, also called rods and cones, transform the light energy to electric impulses that travel to the brain by the optic nerve, a tough white cord-like structure that is connected to the back of the eye. The cornea is connected with the sclera, the tough covering that surrounds the entire eyeball and is referred to as the white of the eye. The eye is protected by the bony orbit in which it sits, as well as by eyebrows, eyelashes, and eyelids that keep dirt, sweat, and other foreign material out. As you saw in our examination of eyes, the pupil will get larger or smaller depending on how much light is available to enter it. We then examined what happens to the light at the lens. Light can only travel through things that are transparent, like air, water, or glass. It travels in a straight line until it runs into another material. When light hits something with a different shape or made of a different material, it is refracted or bent. A lens is a clear, curved object that bends light rays or refracts light. When light passes through it, it bends so all of the rays of light come together at one point, the focal point. When the rays of light work together to focus, they form an image. When light passes through a lens to form an image on a screen, that image is a projected image. These images are always inverted and reversed because the light rays have actually crossed. In our eyes, the image that is projected is smaller than the actual object, allowing the image to fit inside of the eyeball. The image in our eye is actually inverted and reversed from the actual object because it is a projected image. Notice in this diagram that the object being viewed is a full-size giraffe. When this passes into the eyeball, it is projected onto the retina. The image is now much smaller and inverted. The image is focused on the retina and then travels to the brain through the optic nerve. The brain interprets the image so that we can perceive it in the correct way. The brain works in a way that is similar to how landline telephones work. The telephone is a system of electronic devices, connections, computers, wires, and relays. It involves converting energy several times and results in the ability to pick up a telephone and connect with someone on the other side of the world. Receptors, connectors, relays, and wires keep everything in your body in communication. The neuron is the main part of this system. They are basic functional cells of the brain and nervous system and are especially suited to transmitting information from place to place throughout your body. The neuron has three main parts: the cell body, dendrites, and the axon. The cell body is the operations center of the neuron. It contains the nucleus. It is labeled here C. Coming from the cell body in many branches are the dendrites, which receive incoming messages. They are labeled here B. The messages enter the dendrites and travel to the cell body and travel away from the cell body on a long, thin extension of the cell called the axon, labeled here A. At the end of the axon, the messages pass to the dendrites of one or more other neurons, sending the message on its way. The message is an electric impulse. Sending messages takes time. The longer the pathway, the longer it takes for a stimulus to produce a response. The interval of time between stimulus and response is called reaction time. There are many imaging devices or machines that help us study the brain. Magnetic resonance imaging, or an MRI, and computerized axial tomography, CAT, allows us to see the structure of the brain. Electroencephalography, also known as an EEG, and positron emission tomography, a PET, are used to study activity levels of the brain, or its function. The image in the top left represents an MRI. As you can see, it takes simply a slice of the brain to allow you to see what its features are. The colored picture in the bottom right corner represents an EEG. The different colors correspond to activity levels in the brain, and activity corresponds to electric impulses.